Right. Hi, Katie. I'm Sally Dominguez. This is the Adventurous Thinkers series, and I'm very excited to have on today one of the most optimistic, innovative, and future-forward thinkers that I could find, Katie Patrick. And Katie, it's always weird to kind of sit there while someone talks about you and you're there just smiling, right? But so I'll do a really quick one. That Katie, I came across Katie on LinkedIn. I since bought her awesome book. Highly recommend this, but we'll talk about that. And she is an environmental advocate, an engineer, and a pioneer in gaming and game thinking. How's that work for you, Katie?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, any intro would be lovely, when it's positive. So thank you. And I love the name Adventurous Thinking. I think that's really cool.
Thank you. All right, so I've plowed through your book and I love everything about it. I love the message. I love the graphics. What I thought was really interesting, because my adventurous thinking strategy has lenses. I have 5 lenses. You talk about 2 lenses, and the lenses are measurement and behavior. And a lot of when you're talking about gaming, not only being apps, but being physical games, being simple things, comes back to data. So I'm wondering, in this current environment where we're getting updated knowledge on the daily and where human behavior appears to be changing in quite fundamental ways, especially the way we work, the way we're living, the way we interact, how do you see your 2 lenses working in the current COVID-19 context?
I don't really work on COVID-19. I mean, my particular area is in environmental change. But the 2 lenses basically mean that if you want to, but you can extrapolate this to any particular cause. So basically the theory is that to get anybody to change, because this is all in the concept, the book is called How to Save the World, which basically means how to make change happen, not imaginary change, but real change. You want to actually change the world in a meaningful way, not just be someone who talks about it. So if you're developing a campaign or a strategy or a startup, whether it's in health, with the COVID-19 sort of thing, or it's environmental change, or it's in entrepreneurship, or it's in anything that you might want to improve in the world, you ultimately need to break down your strategy into this fundamental principle of these 2 lenses of, are you measuring what you want to change in real world data, not just clicks or users? If you're in the startup scene, it's all about new user signups and clicks and how many Facebook likes did you get, or Instagram shares if you're an influencer. But a lot of people haven't extrapolated that back to what is the actual real world metric. That's tons of carbon dioxide, lives saved, trees not cut down. 1 million Facebook likes is not 1 million trees, even if the Facebook likes are about a tree. It's not. So really drilling down into that fundamental real world metric. And then the second lens is, are you using that data in a way that gets a human to do a thing? And these things might sound really obvious when we explain them. Oh yeah, you want to obviously measurably, help more trees be there or save more lives from COVID-19. And obviously you'll need to get some people to take some actions, like switch their lights off or put on solar panels. But I've been in sustainability and social change for 20 years now, and you would be amazed. I would say at least half, if not most, of people working on social impact, entrepreneurship, environmental change, health change, have not figured this thing out. They're making mistakes all the time. You say, what's the numbers about that? Are you measuring it? Are you getting a real-time feedback loop of that data? What is the causal link between what you're trying to do and it creating change? Now, it's not everybody at all. It's maybe, I would say 3/4 of people who work on their stuff are pretty fuzzy about this. And then maybe, 20%-ish are pretty sharp about it. And they're sort of across this, but the majority of people have not worked this out. That you need to have this, that they really aren't quite aware of the numbers. And then they're not really quite aware of the behavior. They're like, oh, I just made a documentary. And then you're like, okay, well, how did the documentary measurably change it? And they're like, well, I think what happens is that after people watch the documentary, then they'll go and do a thing, and then they'll start doing that thing. And then I'm like, are you sure? Have you tested it? Have you got 100 people to watch the documentary and then tested their behaviors afterwards? And most people will be like, no, well, how do you know they did anything? And then there's this, and that's all about sort of bridging this phenomenon called the value action gap, is that you actually need to create projects that get people to do things. And you look at 50% of any project you look up fails at the 2 lenses of measurement and behavior change.
That's so interesting, because in your on your website, when I was stalking around looking at all your bits and pieces, and very excited to sign up for the game design course also. I'm all over this. I was looking at your 3 biggest mistakes, and you were talking about idea bias. And what I thought was a really cool example was somebody wants to get a message out there and change behavior. So they have a festival. You use as festival versus garden. And it made me think about Singapore's Garden by the Bay. I was recently in Singapore doing some speaking, and I'd always seen photos of those incredible artificial trees. They're solar powered, they capture rainwater. I'm a rainwater harvesting designer, so I was all over it. But it's much more than that. And it's not, there's actually nothing on them that says, we're doing this, we've done that. They are the most beautiful structure, and people gather from all over the place to this garden, which is the lung of the city, which is now demonstrating every day how it's growing, how it's powering itself, and how it's collecting rainwater. Instead of, so Singapore could have held an event every year going, we are so sustainable. And people would have come from everywhere, and maybe they would have got a reusable water bottle. But I feel like when you said festival versus garden, I immediately thought of this like incredible, like totally immersive example of what you were saying.
Yeah, and I went into the time to kind of write out that example a bit more fully in the book, because I mean, how many times? I mean, everybody's done it. We've been to a festival or a conference, and everybody sat around. They went to the conference knowing that it was a conference or a festival. And then everybody talked, and then nobody did anything because they were at a conference talking. And then they complained after the conference that all everybody does is talk and take no action. And then the next year you meet the same people all over again. And we're like, it's all talk, we need change. And that's not the individual people's fault attending it, but it's because the designers of the conference made this failure of the 2 lenses of the value action gap, that just because people learn about things, just because people care about things, doesn't lead to action. That's the fundamental thing to understand here, is that if you can get someone to really care about about polar bears, like really deeply care about bears. And what are they called? Solar bears?
They could be a solar bear if they're really hot and kind of ravaged and desiccated.
Yeah. We don't want to have, we don't want any
not laughing about
bears.
that.
But I mean, you can know everything about them, and you can really care. And that education and that emotional concern will do nothing to affect your behaviors, as whether you actually sign up to get solar panels or reduce energy in your home, or like trying to influence your like local government or anything. People who are working on these festivals and conferences all the time, and they're just not thinking about it in terms of like the proper sort of design thinking that you need to do to create change. And you come up with better ideas by trying to get over the value action gap. So instead of having a festival about how we should make water saving gardens, you have this incredible what's it called, that thing in Singapore? I've known the photos.
Gardens by the Bay. I thought it would have a much cooler name than that, but apparently it's officially called Garden by the Bay.
Well, maybe it sounds cooler in Singapore language, whatever
it does.
It's like a cooler sounding phrase or something. But then you have, and since I started doing this, I started having the best ideas. I always had like a lot of ideas.
Yeah, me too.
But then once I started to think this way, now I have like really, really good ideas. Like when you start to see through the 2 lenses.
Because you're always looking for qualifiers. I mean, the thing is, when I run my workshops and things, people go, oh, I've got this idea, but I've got to be really careful. I'm like, come on, man. People have so many ideas, and the more ideas you share, the more prolific you become. And we soon realize it's not about the idea, right? It's about the qualification and then the production of that into something tangible and impactful. And I think that to use those lenses to run through the plethora of ideas that I always figure everybody has, I hope everybody does, they should, then they're a really nice way to stop. And I'm one of those people that gets a bit into the ideas bias. It's a great idea to go, and if it hasn't been measured, how are we going to do it? What are the metrics? Like maybe that's something that hasn't ever been measured before, and you've just hit on something incredibly interesting. Or maybe it hasn't been measured because it doesn't really matter.
Well, yeah, I mean, people do have ideas all the time, and, ideas aren't always great. Ideas can be like a coffin, and you don't want to suffer from poverty of the imagination. I got an email once from someone that said, say no to poverty of the imagination. And if you think that you just have one idea and you just need to protect it and hold it, I'm like, you should be getting multiple ideas a day. You should be like tapping your imagination into the big consciousness of the universe and just like downloading these thoughts. If you open your mind up a bit, they come all the time. And if you learn the proper design thinking frameworks, like say like looking through the data, that's something in the book, that just like scour through it, and then you scour through it and you like get ideas, look into it, and then just write 100. That's an exercise in the book, is to come up with 100 ideas. if someone never ever sets you the exercise of trying to come up with 100 ideas, you probably never will. But if you just sit down and do it for a day, then you can do it. And so when you look into a problem, I mean, you really want to be focusing on the problem, not the idea. Like I'm working on this energy saving Chrome extension right now. And it's not about the idea, whether it's a Chrome extension or what it is. I mean, the fundamental thing we're trying to do is get the CO2 down in people's homes. So the problem remains the same. That's the trunk. And the ideas are like acorns that come off the side. So if you align yourself with the number that you want to change, it can take any sort of idea form, and the ideas are always changing. And you can even have competitors all working in the same field, but you're always working in different niches. You can also sub-niche. There doesn't need to be one social media company. There are multiple and they do different things, and that's okay. I think the whole idea about like being protective about ideas and worried people will steal it and worrying about competitors is just like super crazy, like bottom feeder psychology. You should just
very
be like,
school. It's very old
just
school.
share everything. And like every time people say to me, they're like, oh, you should not let people show your ideas. And I'm just like, oh, for fuck's sake. Like,
I say the opposite.
Give me a break.
Like, do you have patents? And I'm like, I don't. Everything I've designed, I put out there because I figure if I thought it was good enough to work on it, then I think it's good enough to share. If people want to develop it into their own thing, that's okay, because I'm moving on over there. Like, I just feel like we've come out of a kind of a legacy period of everybody protects and does their own thing for money. And now, well, at least I'd like to think, and maybe right now the mindset is more also of we're all in this together. And surely if you have something good that's going to move the game forward, the more people that work on that thing, the better. It's like Tesla and Toyota sharing all of their EV data, you know, sharing a whole bunch of open sourcing, a bunch of their designs that were before then private and secret and monetizable. No,
and I think
like, let's get the game forward.
Yeah. And I think life is a bit more about a bigger picture than just pursuing, your immediate financial gain. Although I don't think there's any particular financial gain to be gotten from hurrying to being patents and secrecy. And what's that thing they call it when they don't like stealth mode or whatever that shit is?
Oh yeah, they're going like, yes, and you're not allowed to.
I'm just like, if you have a stealth mode, I'm just like,
I'm in stealth mode.
Yeah,
now I've got a question, because Jane McGonigal from the Futures Institute is another person that often is a go-to for what are we doing to gamify life, right? Using the word gamification a bit loosely there, because I know it triggers a lot of people. Or trigger warning on the word.
Doesn't trigger me. I like the word. No worries here.
Beautiful. Thanks. Okay. So I was at a talk with Jane about 2 years ago, and she was talking about how in the near future, in terms of data, feels would be more important than facts, which kind of worried me, because I'm like, we were heading down at that point, the whole Insta like, dislike, and a whole lot of the emotional stuff that comes with that. So she was saying how feels are going to be more valuable. And then one of my favorite authors, neuroscience Tali Sharot, was talking about with optimism bias and other things. She was saying, if you've got a really smart person, you cannot change their mind or their behavior with facts. You have to find common emotional ground. Common emotional ground is the way you can get people thinking in a different way to you to come round to your point of view, which is very persuasive. And I kind of teach that now. But where do you sit with that? This idea of do we measure, does feels become a kind of a legitimate measurement around there, or is that more on the behavior side? Like, where do facts sit into that kind of touchy-feely future?
Well, I put it together in this thing called like a Russian dolls example. So ultimately, any project you're trying to do is to change the data, and any emotional resonance you have with somebody is basically just another tool in your toolkit. It's just another mechanism for getting people to change the numbers. So you layer them on top. So you have like the data, ultimately. If we're talking about carbon dioxide, then it's like, how many tons of carbon dioxide did you save? And then you might need to layer that with some infographic design. If it's just an Excel spreadsheet, it's not going to be very motivating. So maybe you can add some colors, add some pie charts, make it look kind of nice, right? And then you're like, okay, well, you've got some basic data then. Let's put another layer on top of it. Let's add some behavioral psychology, some social norms. We'll say, did you know that 9 out of 10 people in your neighborhood are reducing their CO2? Now here's the chart. Look at the chart. You know, the chart's got nice colors on it. And then here's a picture of somebody really cool doing it, because we're naturally mimetic. We want to copy other people. So we'll be like, oh, look at that person. They look great. I want to be like them. So I'll do it too. We unconsciously will copy anything we see, a little bit of behavioral psychology. And then you can add a little bit of like game design. You're like, oh, cool. Well, let's add some like emojis and like, make it sort of fun. So that's starting to get into the motion. So you see it starting to levels of abstraction over the core data framework. So you put some emojis and make it really cool. And you're like, okay, well, I've got this nice little package. Now, how do I make this whole package really resonant? And that's when you can start getting into the feels or the emotionally, the storytelling. So I have this chapter called The Hero's Journey, how to apply the hero's journey to a non-fiction topic. And I love it. I use it every time. I never, ever deviate from it. Even if I'm writing one paragraph, I still use the structure, which is where you say, this is where you're at now, create empathy. This is how everything awesome could be. And then you say like, and then you go through objections. Okay, you might think that's crazy, but I'm a mentor. This is why I'm a credible person to listen to. And this is the big idea for why you should change. And then you can add in some data into that. And then you sort of carry the person along. You address the most difficult thing they're going to go through. And then you get into the really deeper kind of spiritual meaning of why they should. Why? Because you want to be a good person, because you want to reach the end of your life feeling like I did something good with my life that mattered. You get into these more big philosophical issues, and then you kind of wrap up with like the happy ending. And so then that's sort of like a final frame, more sort of like a wrapping over the whole thing. So you've got all these kind of layers going on all the time with the data and the behavioral psychology and the gamification and the kind of more like esoteric emotional storytelling. And if you're a true artist of change, you'll be able to see how all those things fit together like a big puzzle. You won't be so cog-minded, only seeing it as like one little thing, because they all work together. And people need to be talented and educated about how to try and, you know, create the symphony of all the things working.
I mean, which can be very daunting. If you go to someone who's a specialist in one thing and you go like, we're looking to you for a symphony in 6 weeks, you know, and that's why I love the book. That's why I'm doing the course, is because I think, you know, if we can give people tools, in my game, it's tools to change mindset and using lenses to come at things from, you know, better understanding different options. One of my favorite tools that I've just discovered of yours is the Matrix. And I'm just going to share screen for a second, because I know, and this is very specifically, you've done this very specifically for environmental, but I think it's, I'm going to share the screen now. I feel like it's potential, this thing, the gamified Earth Matrix. I feel like the potential of this to help people think in a more holistic way around the data sets they may have within their areas, right? So as a person who is kind of trying to make their legacy changing environmental stuff also, I look at this and go, oh my God, you're right. As per the book, as per the website, I only have to look at this and I start coming with 100 different ways that we could be communicating and making things better and perhaps creating more impact, right? And I'll let you run through it. I've only got a section of it up on the screen now, but we've got the mechanics of different ways of gamifying across the top. And then you've got data sets relating back to environment on the side. Do you want to hit us with an overview of how this currently works?
I will, but I also want to say, when you said you're right, I want to make a little GIF of that with the words under it. And every time like I'm arguing with someone, I'm just going to send them that. I'm going to go, look, Sally says it. I'm right. That's right. That's right.
You're right.
Okay. So the gamified Earth Matrix was, well, it started just with me thinking through how would I apply the strongest influences of change to all the issues that I work on. And so I thought, well, these are all the gamification tools. And if you don't want to call them gamification, you can call them behavioral psychology nudges. That's ultimately what they are. They're just
nudges
ways.
Is nice.
Nudges. They are ways to nudge people to do stuff. Because documentaries and information and negative news articles are not very good at getting people to do stuff, but these things are. So I just went through all of the different things that you can measure. You know, there's nothing there that says clicks. It says carbon dioxide, water use, and I put the units in there as well, just to remind people that there's no clicks, there's no users, there's no money, there's no subscribers, there's no donors. It's the real change, you know. You can put in lives saved in there as well, or like a health issue, although that's all environmental. And so then I just add through it. So you can basically go through this matrix, and then if you look at carbon dioxide, do you have a feedback loop of the carbon dioxide? Hardly anybody has a feedback loop of data. So that's a big thing you want to get right. Screens. Are you publicly showing the data to people so they can see it in the ambient environment? Not an app, not an email, but that they see it. Research shows that when people see things in their unconscious environment, that's why advertising works. When you see Nike all over the place, even if you don't consciously notice it, you'll still be like pro Nike. But the same thing works for environmental data or any sort of data. Just by you walking past it, it will start to influence you. Then badges, using reward systems. If somebody does a good job, give them a badge. You know, that's something you can do on the internet. It's very easy to build that into software. Again, awards. If somebody's the best in the group at saving power or saving water, I mean, why doesn't the city or the mayor give an award every year to the most eco-friendly household based on the data, not based on like whether they have a cool Instagram, you know, and they're called like eco house, but it could be someone totally not environmental, someone who's just really good at saving power.
They used to have those billboards,
you know?
in the East Bay. I feel like in the East Bay in San Francisco, they had those billboards where they'd say super saver of this year, and it'd be some random person who'd done some interesting things in their house.
That sounds cool. They should do that. Yeah.
I haven't seen it. That was a while ago.
But that's a great idea. You know, they can, then they'll tell all their friends and then they'll remember it and they'll put it on everything. And so then people will like want to, you know, get it as well. Then, you know, you have like a star rating, you know, like we have on appliances. How energy efficient is it? You don't need to get everyone to watch like a scary commercial about like this appliance uses up too much CO2 or the polar bears will die. You know, like that's like, you just give it a star rating and people go, oh, well, I want the one with the best star. Yeah. And the last one, my favorite, is emotive animals. And I've actually read multiple research papers on this that shows that better than all of this stuff that we've just talked about for the last 2 minutes, if you show a cute animal that is smiling, when people do a good job, that works better than all of it.
It's the word kawaii, isn't it? Is it?
Oh, that's the word Japan word for cute. Yeah, but its emotions have to respond to the data. So if you're doing badly, the animal will look sad. And if you're doing well, the animal will look happier. And people will just, because we're so emotionally responsive to the emotions of faces, that will outshine all the other gamification metrics.
It's actually really interesting because I was doing some research on the future of education recently, and I was looking into sort of interactive 3D stuff, and I was looking at Epic, who do some amazing stuff in the learning zone. And PETA, the animal people, had done this amazing campaign where when you looked at the screen, it was for kids. When you looked at the screen, there was an animal, a cute animal on the screen, but it took on the facial characteristics and the voice of the viewer watching, the kid, and then spoke to them about PETA issues, animal cruelty, a whole lot of stuff as the animal, but with facial characteristics and voice of the person watching.
Wow.
And I looked at this and was like, that is incredible. I mean, I'm a big bunny person. And this was a bunny talking back to me about certain things in fair trade and certain things about eating. And it was so impactful.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting nexus of using some advanced technology, something that's novel and game-ish, just, you know, that no one's ever seen anything like that before. And then using that emotional resonance that we have with creatures and seeing other, you know, faces, the emotional expressions of other faces gets right to our primordial core. So yeah, I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I'll send that to you. And now, so I wanna, and we're both Aussies living in the States, foot in both camps, I'd say. I'm not sure, how long have you had a foot in both camps? How long have you been in the States?
Well, I was actually born here, although I grew up in Australia as an Australian citizen. So I've always had like a little bit of a foot, maybe just like a baby toe in America. And so I've been here for like 9 years now, full time.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I've been here 12 years, but the first 4, I think I was flying back to Australia at least 50% of the time.
Do you remember being in our magazine, Green Pages magazine?
Yes.
Did you ever get a copy of the magazine? Did you get a copy of it?
I'm pretty sure I did. I will have it in my little pack of hog stuff down here.
Oh, cool. I remember you were on the water tank under the Golden Gate Bridge. Yeah.
Yes. That's funny. Yeah, I'll have it down here. I'm actually just about to do a scrapbook of all my PR before it all fades out and dies, you know, my 5 minutes with hog.
Yeah.
But it was so good. So I wanted to ask you how you see, particularly since you have such an emphasis on both the data side of things and behavior, do you discern a different kind of mindset and approach between Americans and Australians? Say you could pick corporate or you could go general. I don't really mind, depending on where you're working most at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do see a mindset as to whether, in terms of drilling it through those two lenses, I'm not quite sure I can say, because I've only really been getting into this stuff while I've been living in America. So I haven't really had the chance to I haven't even had the chance to fully test it on an American market yet, because it's such a nascent space. Not just my own work, but just as a whole, like it's a very nascent industry. But I would say if we, you know, chatted again in like 3 years, I might have had a chance to really test projects in an American market and also test them in an Australian market, and then give you a really sort of validated, more scientific answer.
Back to the science. Meanwhile,
but meanwhile, just my own sort of like cultural, my difference in Well, I mean, my brother said he's grown up between the two countries. He says he would describe the difference between that, like, Australians are trying to do as little work as possible to get off the clock and go to the beach and basically be as lazy as possible at their jobs as they can get away with. And Americans are trying to work as hard as they can and do as much as work as they can to, like, please the customer, to do everything sort of like overworked. That's him. My case, I mean, the reason why I came here is because I felt very stifled in Australia, being someone who I love to learn. I've always loved to learn. I read academic papers all the time. I constantly read books and read podcasts. And although I had some really good friends and I had a good experience in Australia, I was very intellectually lonely. I didn't have people that I could, that also just like nerded out on academic papers on the weekend, you know, like, and if I did, people would start,
the Bay Area.
People would criticize me. They'd think I was weird. They'd think it'd be like I was like overly kind of like academic, or they'd say, oh, you can just give us another like scientific explanation, Katie. There's such a culture in Australia of just not supporting innovation and intellectual growth. And although there are a few really cool people around like that, I just felt like there was never enough of them to kind of create a bubble to be in. I was always like, had some like,
because that's why I left. That was the same.
Yeah.
I love the place. I love it. I love the humor. I love everything. But when people talk about tall poppy, it is so real. And I think that people are very quick to say, oh, that's really weird in a critical way. Whereas I think if somebody says I'm weird, I'm like, I'll take it. I've always been weird and I'm happy with it. Like, that's how the cool stuff happens. Like, you don't want to be following the herd or you won't think of the new stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So that I was interested whether you had that or whether I, as an old person, was in a different,
Well, I don't think you're that much older than me, but yeah, totally. I've spent my whole life being teased, criticized, and made fun of for being an intelligent, curious person. And if you want to add being like blonde and blue-eyed to that, then it just gets really, really bad. I mean, it's nothing you can really talk about publicly that easily, but I've constantly been a hate victim of groups, and people have been very cruel to me for absolutely no reason, me being polite as possible, just because there's something about the Australian culture that not everybody, maybe 1 in every 20 people just loses their shit over somebody who's of that innovative style of nature, and it's for no fault of your own. It's something weird in Australia. And then when you come to Silicon Valley, everybody's like that. Everybody's like, oh, I'm working on some like machine learning thing, and like, here's a robot that I like welded up from parts. And then so like, I just made this satellite that went off. Like, I have multiple friends who have made their own satellites and shot them into space with the photos to prove it. And I'm like, oh my God, like I got to hang out with like real astronauts. Like, yeah, I'm just doing an astronaut apprenticeship at NASA. And basically so cool. Everybody has these super nerdy minds. And it's not about being like wanting to be the coolest or the smartest. It's just when you have a personality that you love to learn and tinker and do things, this is the place to be around those people, and nobody ever teases you for it. So, I mean, I suppose I'm still like a little kid that feels like I was teased at school a lot. And now I can sort of like be with my people.
Yeah, I felt a little hurt when I left because of that, because I'd done all this stuff and I'd invented some stuff and I was so excited. And I had my architecture colleagues go, what makes you think you're a product designer? I'd be like, well, I just invented something. I just invented a whole new process. Like, how can I? And then they'll be like, well, you're good at marketing yourself then, aren't you? And I'm like, I can't market myself. I'm literally just telling the truth. And even had an agent who said to me a few years ago, we need a speaking reel. And on the speaking reel, I said, I've won several product awards. And she goes, you should probably cut that out. People are going to hate you for that. And I'm like, well, how else would you like me to say it? Whereas it's funny, right? And especially being in California, people, as much as there is we're operating in stealth mode, there is also this vibrant level of idea sharing and information sharing, and the weirdest books you can possibly find get published and circulated in the best way. I think and I wish there was a way to work out how the fundamentals of that, so that could be replicated for people everywhere, because, it's not the tech per se, it's not anything per se, but this mindset of everybody's welcome. As long as you want to talk about cool stuff, bring it in, and we'll all have a little kumbaya moment over something really geeky.
Yeah. And you just find out, like, I started here living in hacker houses, just on a bunk bed, learning how to code, and everybody was so into helping each other. And it was like, you actually got social kudos by being more helpful, because you were like, I know how to solve that bug. And then it would be like, let me solve it for you, because I'm like the smartest one in the room, everybody. Yeah, I got it. Whereas in Australia, it was people would just be like, I charge $1,000 a day for that, just even to talk about it. There was just it was like, well, I studied hard to do computer programming. Why should I like share for you for free? That would be crazy.
Yeah. It might be density. It might be population density that frees people to to be happy to be small fish in big pond and therefore helping all the other small fish swim in a school, you know?
Well, it's very selective here. I mean, everybody's here because they wanted to be here for the same reason. So it's kind of
Yes.
like a magnet for everyone in the world who was like, I want to like tinker on weird, you know, things, or maybe you want to make $1 billion as well. People are here for both reasons. But everybody's here together, just trying to push themselves to do the most interesting work they can do. And that's a very, like, I find that very aligned with my personality. In Sydney, you get cool by being like really glamorous. I felt like having money and being glamorous and beautiful and having celebrity connections was kind of like what made you cool there. And I was never quite that into that scene. I never, it was like having the coolest clothes and the coolest house and being like beautiful and wearing a bikini on Bondi Beach and all of that. It wasn't really ever my scene. But here, like, this is more my scene of my inner self is aligned.
Yeah, well, I love your outer self too, because the website, just everything about the design of it as well as the content has made me really excited because, you know, I shared with you before we started recording, I'm starting this new Epic Resilience program, and I'm going to start by doing your game course and understanding this concept of, you know, don't just put a level of interaction with people, understand what you're trying to achieve, and then be smart about how with all these different mechanics you could access what they are, how to access them. I was looking at your little tutorial on color. So I'm very, very excited that all of this stuff is online and available. And I want to thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. I'm glad for people to find it. It's a very specialist niche, so it's not for everybody, but for the right person, it's amazing. So it's very wonderful when people discover it when they're just at that time, when they're really ready for it.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to put all the links up at the end and the link to the book too. And thanks so much, Katie.
No worries. Thank you. This was super fun.